Good evening. This open meeting of the Zoning Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with the recently signed Act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This act includes an extension until April 1st, 2022, of the remote meeting provisions of the governor's March 12th, 2020 executive order, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. The law has two major parts. First, the new law allows public bodies to continue providing live, adequate alternative means of public access to the deliberations of the public body, instead of holding meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. Adequate alternative means may include, without limitation, providing public access through telephone, internet, or satellite-enabled audio or video conferencing, or any other technology that enables the public to clearly follow the proceedings of the public body in real time. Second, the new law authorizes all members of a public body to continue participating in meetings remotely. The open meeting law's requirements that a quorum of the body and the chair be physically present at the meeting location remains suspended. For this meeting, the Zoning Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's web meeting calendar and the ZAC meeting agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting may also be broadcast by HCAM through one of its many channels or platforms. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Basic business ground rules. I will introduce each item on the agenda. If members wish to engage, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. Not every agenda item will feature public comment. For the items with public comment, after the members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment as follows. The chair will first ask members of the public who wish to speak to identify their names and addresses. Once the chair has the list of all public commentators, they will call on each by name and afford 3 minutes for any comments. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Thank you. With that, we jump on to the agenda. The first, today's meeting is, I think, a presentation by, I believe, John on the Mbta communities presentation. And then a list of, we can discuss the future work program, including tree protection, which I think we've deferred for a while now. And then conversion of residential property, Airbnbs and short-term rentals, garden apartments, village housing and residential districts, and OSLPD bylaw. And then towards the end, we will review and pass the minutes of Feb 14th. With that, I yield the floor to John.
So I apologize for those of you who've heard this spiel before, probably more than once. But here we go.
For some reason, I thought even in this forum, we had that presentation, but obviously I was mistaken. So
yeah, so you've seen it a couple times. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
There we go. Is that better?
Beautiful.
All right. MBTA communities. The controversial topic right now. So what is an MBTA community? Just to give you some background on not just the program, but what makes up the participating communities. So an MBTA community is a community that either had service in the past under a certain system, or more likely currently has service, whether it's through the bus service, express bus, T, or the commuter rail. So this will cover 175 communities in basically central and eastern Massachusetts. So it's not an insignificant amount. This gives you a nice visual of the communities. You've got the dark blue and the blue are the inner core. They're served by either the bus or the subway. Then you've got the dark green, which are the commuter rail towns, the ones that actually have the commuter rail in them or are have the commuter rail within half a mile of the borders. And then the light green are the MBTA adjacent communities. And this will come into play, these different categories, when we're determining how many housing units the proposed zoning district needs to cover. This is just a little bit of background. I'm not going to go through this one. It's the law itself and what the establishing language. So what is MBTA Communities Initiative? It is an initiative that's focused on zoning. It is essentially the state trying to focus development around transportation nodes. So a very common and basic tenet of planning, you want to have as much density of residentially around transportation so that you don't have a lot of traffic. The law does not require the units that are required under the law to be constructed, just that the area is zoned for it and provides the ability to develop these units. A town will not be out of compliance if no one ever builds it. You're only in compliance if you've got the regulations that allow for it. These new regulations do not relate to 40B at all. Completely different section of the law, completely different intent behind both of them. 40B focus on deeded and restricted affordable units. The MBTA communities does not have a capital A affordable component. It is just trying to create more units so that housing is attainable by more families. And then all municipalities that are categorized on that map that I showed you in a previous slide need to comply, otherwise they can lose funding from the state. And we'll go through that a little bit more right now. Any community that does not adopt the zoning district that complies with the law will not be eligible for funding for Housing Choice Initiative funds, Local Capital Projects Fund, which I believe is a relatively new fund, and the MassWorks Infrastructure Program. Hopkinton has gotten a lot of money from the MassWorks program, and I have a slide going into detail about how much we've gotten. But if we don't comply, we are ineligible for these funding sources, which could impact our infrastructure development moving forward. So this presentation was done back in April, so the deadline had already passed. But what we needed to do to comply with the law as it stands right now is have this presentation before the select board, submit the information form, which we did, and then if we were not compliant with the parcel map at the state level, we had to submit that, but we were. So that was something we didn't have to worry about. So we just had two things to finish, and which we did. We met the deadline. So going back to the funding sources. So MassWorks, we received $5 million for the road construction of Legacy Farms North, and we received money for the Main Street Corridor project that's going on right now in two different pots, one for engineering and one for the actual construction. There's been talk, those of you who attended town meeting are familiar with the talk that we may try and connect to the MWRA system. Any infrastructure improvements that the town would have to make to do that could be funded or partially funded by MassWorks. So something that we've got in the very near future that may come up could be funded by MassWorks. So if we're not compliant, then we would have to find a different funding source for that, and it potentially could come from town meeting. Any potential future infrastructure improvements related to affordable housing can be covered by MassWorks. So if we have anything like that nature moving forward in the near future, we wouldn't be eligible to use MassWorks funding, and any other really infrastructure improvements that we're looking at doing that we don't necessarily have nailed down right now, but if they come up or if they're in a plan for the future, an action plan for the future, then we would have to find different funding for it. So how does Hopkinton fit into the MBTA communities? We are covered by the Southborough commuter rail station because our border is within half a mile of that station. We are not part of the MBTA communities because of the Ashland station. So we wouldn't have to comply on two different fronts, just on the Southborough station front. This is a visual representation of where the station is and what the coverage in Hopkinton is. A little bit more detail and give you some background. Can you guys see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay. This is not going to be included because that is part of Hopkinton State Forest. This is Carboni's. This parcel and our chair's property may be the most at risk of being developed just because Carboni's is essentially vacant right now. And the program requires at least 5 acres to develop it. So you would need to have, you wouldn't be able to pick out any of these lots. Like the owners wouldn't be able to sell them to a developer and develop one of these lots as MBTA zoning or one of these. They'd have to group it together so that there's at least 5 contiguous acres. So Carboni's is really the most at-risk parcel. This is the Trevor Lane property, probably not going to get developed for MBTA communities anytime soon. And these parcels over here and extending over to here are the newly approved Turkey Ridge subdivision, which is currently under development now. So unlikely that they are going to be participating in any kind of redevelopment anytime soon. And I should say, if anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in. I'm kind of thinking this is a relatively informal presentation.
I have a quick one that I don't think
Sure.
pertains to us, but I'm curious. You said that we're not within a half mile of Ashland, so we don't have 2 zones. If we were, would we have to have 2 parcels?
So you'd have to have probably 2 zoning districts, but the total number of, so I'll go through in this slide at the bottom, the last bullet, the total number of housing units that would be covered under the districts would likely be able to be split across the 2 districts, I would assume.
The reason I ask is again, it didn't really have anything to do with us. I'm pretty sure that Weston, a pretty hoity-toity community, has 3 stations alone within Weston. So this could ruffle some feathers in that town, I would guess.
Yes.
I used to kind of laugh that Weston had the political pull to get themselves 3 stations. And now it may be coming back to bite them in ways that a lot of Westonians don't like.
Yeah. So I don't know. I didn't look into it because it didn't apply to us.
Right.
But I don't know if you can split the calculation between those districts or if each district would have to meet that calculation to get the number of housing. So these are just some general guidelines. Sorry, any more questions, Ted?
Not for me. I was,
Okay.
again, I was thinking more of Weston than us. So I was
Yeah.
just curious.
Yeah. So just some general guidelines on what this district needs to look like. It's got to be a reasonable size, which they've decided is at least 50 acres. And I believe it was 10% of the 5 or half mile radius. So that's where they got that number from. The district must allow multifamily units at a density of at least 15 units by right. So no special permit required. You can do a certain level of review under site plan, but it has to be done by right. And basically that really allows for a lot of flexibility on the developer's part, because there's not much oversight that the town's going to have in terms of what the development will look like or the community will be like in that area. There are no age restrictions allowed, so it can't be 55 plus. They are focusing this on made for families. So you can't restrict the number of bedrooms, can't restrict the number of I think it was parking spaces, other things to allow for larger 3-bedroom units or anything like that.
Question for you.
Yeah.
Do they have to meet our height requirements within our zoning?
They
Okay.
would. Yeah. Unless the height requirements, I don't think they are, but unless the height requirements are written in a way that they wouldn't allow that type of density by right. So if you've got a certain height, right? And so I'll say it this way, and then I'll go back to a different thought. So if you've got a certain height over the certain acreage, if that density isn't 15 units per acre, or as you'll see later, 20 units per acre, then that wouldn't be allowed. But in reality, and this is my second thought, in reality, we're writing a whole new zoning district. So the height is going to have to be whatever it's going to have to be to allow it in that district. So if we have a
Okay,
50 acre unit,
so they don't have to comply with our height restrictions.
Well, they will, but it's going to be whatever we write the height restrictions to be in this new overlay district.
Oh, because it's a new district, you can
It's
have.
right.
brand new
It's not
laws.
going to be
Okay.
the underlying zoning district. We have to create a new overlay district.
Okay.
Because
So,
our zoning right now, as it stands, doesn't allow this density.
well, obviously, yeah. But I mean, I was wondering whether or not it was the density alone that was being changed, but it's everything related to making that density possible
Right.
that
Because
has to be changed.
if you don't practically allow for that density because of
Yeah.
some other zoning restriction, then
Yeah.
that's not by right.
Okay.
They'd have to
got
get a
it.
variance, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. So
Got it.
we're going to need to take some care in designing this bylaw or this overlay bylaw to meet the requirements that they're setting forth, which is really focused on the density, and then tailor it as much as we can, which probably isn't going to be a lot, to how we want it to more closely align with Hopkinton as it stands.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry if that was confusing.
No, that's okay.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
this
a-
is,
it's a
yeah,
wholly
this is my
separate-
second or third time, I mean, seeing this, but it's
Yeah,
the
it's
first
a
time
whole
I'm
separate
cluing.
district. We're not trying to like squeeze it into the underlying district. We have to draw out a whole new district or overlay district to allow for this.
Got it.
Yeah. So we have to allow at least 15% of the total housing units in town. So we have our last SHI that the state has says is we have 6,645 units. 15% of that is 997 units. So what that means is that we either have to have a district not of 50 acres, but of 66.5 acres to allow for 15 units per acre, or we can have a district the size of 50 acres, but then allow for 20 units per acre. Because we can't get that 997 units, we'll call it 1,000. We can't get that 1,000 units into a 50-acre zoning district at 15 units per acre. Does that make sense?
But John, I have a question. So you said that this is a brand new bylaw. The height restrictions are something that we would define. Yet the state has determined that 50 acres is a minimum size of the zone. Conceivably, we could decide that, again, I'm making up something here, that a 20-story building could be built and we actually don't need 50 acres. We could build a bunch of them. So are these requirements in conflict, or is there a conscious decision to make this 50 acres with the understanding that maybe we will not build a 10 or 12 acre building? Is that?
So I don't quite understand your question. The density and the height are going to be two separate things.
Okay.
So theoretically, a Newton or a Watertown, which are going to have higher requirements for housing because they're inner core, they may allow a 20-story building.
Okay.
I don't think Hopkinton's going to allow a 20-story
Okay.
building,
Okay.
but we need to allow a height that will provide for the density that we're required to have, which is 997 units.
Got it. Okay.
John,
Yes.
do you happen to know what the density of the apartments over at Windsor by the Spoon? Well, what is that density of that development?
I don't, but I'll go over that. I'm going to talk about that and Woodview at Legacy Farms too. So I don't know what the density is. I think we did the calculation a couple weeks ago, and it was less than 15 units per acre, but there's other issues with that development that wouldn't allow it to qualify for this.
Oh, okay. I wasn't even thinking that. I was just trying to picture what a new development might look like.
Yeah, that's a good question. I can definitely find that out to give you a picture as to what 15 or what that would be compared to 15 units per acre. They provided some photos of 15 unit per acre developments, but I didn't think they were very good because it was not the whole development. It was like this unit is, viable at 15 units per acre, but without seeing how many of those units you need to actually get 15 units per acre, it's not a very good visual. So I can try and find something that is a better visual. I'm sure it's out there.
I have a question.
Yes.
When we're talking about this, I'm picturing those apartments that are by the Ashland train station. You know what I'm talking about? I think it's like Sirius or Cirrus. Have you guys ever been down there?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I recently drove through there.
Is this sort of like what they want? Like like a giant building with a bunch of units, like right next to a train station? That's sort of what they're picturing.
So, I mean, yes and no. Anyone at the state level will say, no, 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 there's a lot of variety that you can have in terms of development. That's at 15 units per acre. You can have townhouses, you can have these garden apartments, you could have a multi-story building, you can have all of this stuff. In reality, depending on how much land a developer can actually get in Hopkinton, right? If a developer can only
Just
get,
texted Brooks Yo to talk, ask me about something, and then he messaged me.
no, I lost my train of thought. If you know the Carbonis property got developed, and that's really the only development that's the parcel that's able to get developed, maybe they would go at a higher density because they can. But that doesn't mean they're going to be a 10-story, 20-story building. They may think that we can do townhomes that would work better on that site.
But one of the requirements was that it must be family friendly. So I'm assuming they want at least 2-bedroom apartments, because I wouldn't consider a 1-bedroom apartment a family friendly apartment.
Right. So they're going to leave it up to the developer that you have to allow for 3-bedroom apartments and family friendly apartments. You can't restrict the number of bedrooms. So you can't establish a zoning district that says you can do 15 units per acre, but you can't do any more than 2 bedrooms on any parcel, right? They're not allowing that. So they're saying you can do 15 units per acre and then leaving it at that. So if a developer thinks that 3-bedroom apartments are more profitable, then they might do 3-bedroom apartments. If they think that 2-bedroom apartments are more profitable, they don't have to do 3-bedroom. There's no requirement to do 3-bedroom. It's just that they have the ability to if they want to.
Okay, but even if they went with like the minimum legal size bedroom, if you want more units, they would probably put less bedrooms, right?
Or a mix, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe do like 50% 2-bedroom, 25% 1-bedroom, 25% 3-bedroom. I've seen
Because
that.
I could be wrong, but it's my understanding that the more bedrooms you have, the larger the square footage of the living space has to be. Like you have to have a slightly larger kitchen and a slightly larger like family room. Or
It's possible, yeah.
I don't know. That was just
Yeah,
something
it's probably a building code question.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm done.
Okay, so we did some background research. Sorry, any other questions I should ask before I start? Sorry.
Actually, yeah. I'm wondering, just in terms of the calculation, this is probably an easy question, and I probably could answer it myself, but the roads, the setback, any yards, anything like that counts in the acreage, right? So, we theoretically, what they can put on every square inch of property is not what we're looking at. We're thinking, yes, we would like a development made if a development is done in that area to actually have a little bit of green space and maybe a little bit of parking. So am I right that they would be using, the roads, the parking lots, that would be part of our acreage that they calculate?
So yeah, it's going to have to be a balancing act to figure out how much open space you want to require and figure out the paved area. I mean, they could always put parking underneath. So I don't think it's up to the town to factor in the parking versus the density. So if you say, 15 units per acre, if you have a 1-acre parcel, just for argument's sake, you just need to allow 15 units per acre. If you require larger setbacks or higher parking rates, then you're going to have to allow for taller buildings.
Okay.
Because theoretically, you can't have anyone who's doing a calculation to see if you comply is going to factor in the setbacks. And they're going to say, here's your building envelope. So you require 15 units per acre on a 1-acre parcel, but half the parcel is taken up by setbacks that you can't build in. So then do you allow for the height to go up high enough to fit the 15 units on that 1 acre? If not, then you're not compliant. You're not practically or realistically allowing 15 units per acre on that parcel.
Yeah.
But in terms of parking lots and roadways, that's a good question. That's a good question. That's something that we can definitely ask the state when we have a chance. And hopefully they'll have more guidance about that. One of the things that we've asked for is a model bylaw. So once they develop a model bylaw, we can really just tinker with it, get it to where we want it, and then put it into a town meeting. But then if we have to figure it out on our own, then it's going to obviously take a little bit longer and probably have some more misreads. Anything else? Okay. So we looked internally to see if any other parts of town could qualify as this district, because they were kind of gray, but now they've cleared it up a little bit more. They said you could potentially locate the district elsewhere in town if somewhere else in town already meets all of these requirements. Then they said, well, you really can only do at most half of the district. Half of the district needs to be within half a mile of the train station. The other half can be somewhere else, as long as it meets certain other requirements. So we looked at the BR district, the BD district, the downtown business district, because we didn't require a maximum residential unit on that. They're by right. However, they need to be done as a mixed use development. You have to have commercial on the ground floor and then residential above. So we're like, that doesn't really allow residential by right. It allows residential mixed use by right. Also, the other problem is it is not even close to easily accessible pedestrian wise to the train station, because you'd have to walk all the way down Cedar Street, and there's no sidewalk on Cedar Street. So because of those two things, we really ruled out the BD district as possibly fitting this requirement, and maybe allowing us to split it up. So we do 25 acres up by the train station and 25 acres downtown. So it looks like we're going to probably have to do all of the land around the train station in that radius that I showed you in an earlier map. So this is, Ted, what I was talking about. We looked at whether these developments would already qualify and comply, and then we wouldn't have to do the district elsewhere. Legacy Farms, the Woodview at Legacy Farms, and then Windsor at Hopkinton. Both of them won't qualify for a very simple reason. Windsor at Hopkinton was a 40B and limits the number of bedrooms, and Legacy Farms was developed under master plan special permit. So neither one of them were allowed by right, and we wouldn't really be able to change the development to allow those by right now that they're already developed, because I doubt that would qualify.
And they
like
don't
I
have
said-
they don't have easy access to the train station anyway.
That as well, yeah. We looked, like I said, we looked at the downtown business district, but that really wouldn't work. And so what we've realized and concluded is that it's very unlikely Hopkinton would be able to qualify to split the district, and we're going to have everything within half a mile of the train station. So these are just some other technical details I probably have covered in the body of the rest of the presentation. We can't limit size of the units, number of bedrooms, size of the bedrooms, or number of occupants. That's really promoting the family-friendly developments. Has to be allowed as of right, so they don't have to get special permit, variance, any kind of approval from ZBA or planning board. They can do site plan. We can do site plan review, but only on certain things. So vehicular access, architectural design, and screening. So we are not sure how stormwater comes into play. I think it would be a big misstep if the state doesn't allow us to require stormwater management permits for these types of developments, but we haven't heard anything about that yet. So we need to talk to the state a little bit more and get some guidance on that. It wouldn't prevent anything from being done by right. It would just really manage the stormwater management system on site. But we also try and do that through site plan. And if that's going to be limited, we don't know how the stormwater is going to be limited. We can be doing overlay districts, or we can do underlying districts, and I don't think there's going to be a problem for us because we've already figured out where the overlay is going to be. You can't do separate parcels that aren't contiguous. You have to have at least 5 acres of contiguous land to be considered part of the district.
So John, when you say that they don't have to come by right, things like subdivision regs and all those things don't apply in this situation at all, do they?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah,
But they still, do they need to come in front of the planning board at all to seek any kind of permission?
potentially so maybe
Okay.
for a stormwater permit, and then I would assume since we have some authority under site plan review, they'd have to come before even a modified site plan review process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a little out of date because we've already passed this deadline, but the next steps are to meet all the requirements, which we did. Discuss the requirements of the district, and internally means internally me and the other people in the planning department, but also Zach, and try and figure out what this district can look like. I think we really should hold off on any discussions until we get some guidance and a model bylaw, because otherwise we may just be doing a lot of work that isn't really necessary later on if it's going to be done at the state level for us, and it'll help clarify what they actually want versus us trying to figure out what they want with limited guidelines. And then we got to begin the town meeting process for approval of the zoning district once Zach is done with that and planning board is done with that. And it's looking like it's going to be 2023 or 2024, probably not 2023, not annual town meeting at least, because we really haven't gotten a lot of guidance on the next steps and deadlines, but maybe 2024.
Oh, so there is no deadline imposed by the state to create the zoning district at all?
Not yet. So right now they've only got the to comply right now. And that was giving this presentation, filling out the form and making sure your maps are accurate.
Oh.
At some point in the future, they haven't told us when. Excuse me. At some point in the future, they're going to tell us the next deadline. And we don't know what that's going to be, whether it's having a draft zoning article that can be reviewed by the district attorney, or if it's passing a draft article at town meeting, or what. So we're waiting. That's really what we're waiting on to see where we need to go next. So we're kind of in a holding pattern at this point. And I don't think it's really productive for Zach to talk about the details of this until we get a little bit more guidance. And that's what I got for this presentation. Any questions that haven't been asked throughout the process, happy to answer them now.
Are there any legal challenges to this?
Not as of my knowledge yet. I don't think it's set in stone enough for anyone to actually challenge it legally.
I'm curious. I'm not philosophically against this. I think that we want to have a country where more people are taking commuter rail and things. But I'm curious where in the State House this began. Does this come from urban communities wanting, I don't know, a chance to get out of the city and go out into the suburbs? Does this come from the MBTA saying we can't pay our bills? Do you know what the impetus for this was?
That's a good question. I don't. So the Housing Choice Initiative, which began before this MBTA communities, the MBTA communities is like kind of part of the Housing Choice Initiative. The Housing Choice Initiative recognized that Massachusetts is woefully underhoused, and they put a bunch of other programs together to try and give towns funding to create more housing, not necessarily affordable housing, but attainable housing. And so this is probably just a more aggressive offshoot of that initiative. My read on it is that this, and I don't want to get kicked out of town when I'm proven wrong on this, but my read on this is it's really focused on the inner core communities right now, providing more housing in those communities where the density is going to be higher. There's more to lose on their part because they get a lot more MassWorks funding. Hopkinton is kind of along for the ride at this point. Because we're basically already developed around the train station, we're probably not going to see a ton of development happen really quickly. It's going to be moving from Boston outward. And that's just really also a function of the demand for housing. You have more demand for those communities so that people can travel into Boston. There's going to be less demand in Hopkinton. I know that the argument is going to be, well, we've got great schools, we're going to have more families coming in. That may be true, but like Ted, you also said, Weston's going to have this, Wellesley's going to have this, Newton's going to have this. Other communities are also, I think Sherborne and Dover are going to have this. Other communities that are also competitive educationally with Hopkinton are also going to have to comply. And so it's going to take a little bit of the load off of Hopkinton's shoulders moving forward. Another part of my read on this is that, and this is a little hyperbolic, but when global climate change really starts affecting coastlines, and Hopkinton is now a coastal community and we've lost towns, this is going to be in place in the future to provide an outlet for the housing demand that may crop up in towns like Hopkinton. It may not be there now, but as more people move to the state, there may be even higher demand than there currently is. So this is kind of putting it in place when the demand isn't quite there yet, so that it's in place, towns can think about what they actually want. And then when the demand actually happens, it's in place and people can do what they need to do. You've got towns like Grafton that have the train station next to Tufts, and I forget what that development that's going on right now right across the street is, but that is probably going to happen a lot faster than anything in Hopkinton because you've got the available land. I think Westboro already has a development that may or may not meet these requirements within half a mile of the train station. But even if it doesn't, they can put what we're going to do, essentially a zoning district in name only, on top of the current development that's there. And then if it becomes profitable enough for a developer to tear down what's there and build something else, then that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to be anytime soon. So I think it's really focused on the inner core communities, and the ones that are within 95 rather than 495, because that's where the bigger demand is, the more the higher potential for redevelopment, and just the more opportunities for transportation nodes rather than the one we've got near town. They've got a couple. Again, that's just my read on it. Don't run me out
No,
of town.
you're right, of course. Your read's probably better than anyone else in this room. So.
Definitely. Yeah, I don't think that there's, I personally also, don't philosophically disagree with this concept. Housing is horrible prices and very hard to get for people. So I see the state. I see the point of the state, what they're doing, trying to say, you're not all going to live in the city, but let's make it possible for people to commute via commuter rail and so, and then let's make a bunch of towns be creative about it, figure it out. So, but even with the Carboni property, not all of it is developable because there's wetlands there. So say 15 units an acre for the, 8 acres that are there or something like that. It's not, we're not talking thousands of units. And,
Yeah.
and again, it's not going to happen tomorrow. So.
Yeah. That's a good point too. Also with the Carboni's properties, there's no water or sewer. So as of right now, they'd have to have a wastewater treatment plant on site. They'd have to have enough room for wells. That may change with the MWRA connection that the town voted at town meeting, but that's still in the future. And we don't know if that's going to actually happen. That also doesn't solve the wastewater problem. So they may be allowed to build 15 units per acre. They may not be able to build 15 units per acre just because of the infrastructure requirements. So, and I mean, that's not going to be any different if a group of the single family homeowners on Lincoln Street decided to group together and sell their land. There'd still probably be water and wastewater issues that would practically limit the number of units that could physically be built on that property.
Through the chair. John, is there any way that the center school property could be used in implementing this somehow as that half of the units developed away from that half mile?
Probably not, because it doesn't have pedestrian connectivity to the train station. If there was a regular shuttle that ran between downtown and the train station, maybe that would satisfy that requirement. That's something we need more guidance on from the state too. And then we'd have to set up, a shuttle system.
John, just for curiosity, what is the definition of pedestrian requirement? Can it be a walking distance at all? Can it be 1 mile? I mean, it has to be 0.4.
Yeah, so I don't think there's any set in stone definition, but it's more of a subjective, this needs to be accessible for pedestrians.
Okay.
And again, what that means, I don't think we're on the cusp, to be honest, so I don't think it matters either way. But if you're half a mile versus quarter of a mile, I don't know if they care that much, but I mean, we're clearly more than even that in those sidewalks. So, yeah.
I did take a look just for discussion purposes. There is a sidewalk that starts directly across from Carboni's to the train station. Because I was wondering if there wasn't a sidewalk, would it be on the town to have to pay for a sidewalk to make that pedestrian accessible. But interestingly, it begins directly across from Carboni's and goes to the train station.
Yep.
I think that's more on the Southborough side, right? Just after the entering Hopkinton sign on the from if you come from the other side, right?
Well, if my little trip in the Google car while John was talking is accurate, from the bridge at Southborough, where the T station is, you can go south on a sidewalk all the way to across the street from Carboni's.
Got it.
Or Curtis's house.
Thank you, John.
So John, just to be clear, you're pretty much saying this is where we're going, but we're in a holding pattern still, and this is a future agenda item.
That is accurate. Yeah, I think until we get some more guidance or a model bylaw from the state, there's really not much we should be doing.
Yeah.
Aside from just educating ourselves on the requirements, any changes and the guidelines, that kind of stuff, because we don't want to move forward an article that we developed ourselves that doesn't quite meet all the requirements and have to start from scratch. It's going to be better to get a model bylaw that we can tailor to make sure that we're including everything that's going to be required at the state level, and we won't have to do this process twice.
You know, it's been a while since Ria was with us, sadly, but she used to talk about getting electric buses in town. And for a little while, we were talking about Liberty Mutual and what could become of that. What's going on with the buildings at Liberty Mutual? If there was an electric bus shuttle in town, what's going on with, I know all about the solar farm behind it, but what's going on with the buildings there?
I haven't heard anything recently. I believe they're trying to lease them out and find a tenant, but I don't know. Oh, so the people who bought the solar farm or developing the solar farm bought the building as well, sectioned it off, and has now and sold it to a different company. So they don't own it
Oh,
anymore.
okay.
So it's another company that's actually trying to lease it out.
Thank you. So if there are no other questions from the members of the board, does this need to be opened up to the public if there is anyone?
So Zach doesn't, it's not a public hearing, so no, but if you want to, there's nothing stopping you.
Anyone having any questions from the public? I presume that's a no. Okay. Moving on, future work program.
Through the chair, I'm
yes.
sorry, Sundar. I have one comment for you, John. The Trevor Lane, the one that's labeled as Trevor Lane on the map that you have in that presentation, I think that that's actually Forest Lane. It's the preserve that's in that location, because Trevor Lane is like across the street and up a little bit. Anyhow, just something to look at. And yeah, and Sundar can go back to his agenda item. I'm sorry.
No, perfectly fine. So yeah, future work program. I think, and I know Curtis was unable to join, but regardless, so the items are, we can start with tree protection. I know we've not had much of a discussion. I think at this point, well over a few months, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe even closer to a year. What do we? So sorry, Mary, just for my guidance, was this plan to say that, okay, here is an agenda for future meetings? I mean, not in this meeting, I guess. So put some timeline around when we should be trying to time box some of these discussions. Was that the goal of? I presume that was the goal of the future work program agenda item, right?
I presume so as well. John, did you have a discussion with
Through
Curtis?
the
about
chair.
this?
No specific discussion, but yeah, generally we were listing all of the items that have come up as work plan items, and then really, I guess, trying to figure out what the committee wants to talk about next.
Okay.
So I will mention through the chair that we've gotten emails from residents on Pike Street about the Airbnb that's on that road. And they wanted us to take a look at short-term rentals and Airbnbs. And I know that somebody else has reached out about that. So that may be one of the first ones we want to take up. I know that there's also been interest in the tree protection bylaw. So that's another one that we want to take up. And then if I remember correctly, the Garden Apartments Village Housing was recommended by the planning board chair because those two districts, those two articles in the zoning are only activated when the town is below 10%. So if somebody wanted to do a garden apartment or a village housing, they couldn't do them right now because we're above 10% in affordable housing. So the question was, do we want to change it so that those are allowed above 10%? Because there has been some interest in the past for those types of developments.
Okay.
Through the chair, could you put up the agenda so that we can see the list, John?
Let me open it up.
Thanks.
Through the chair, as long as we were getting some recent developments with A, B, C, D, E, what do we know about B? Where did that idea discussion come from? I do remember E. I think I remember talking about that. I don't remember B.
The conversion of residential property, if I may, through the chair.
Of course.
That was kind of a next step discussion in terms of making some of our zoning more accessible, I guess, making housing development more accessible, smaller units, more dense units in certain areas. So this was kind of next on our agenda. I would suggest that it be talked about kind of in the same time frame as the Garden Apartments Village Housing, because there's a lot of overlap. It's not exact, of course, but conversion of residential property, we looked at it like 3 years ago, I think, and I don't know how much since then, but there are a number of restrictions, and we could consider making it a little bit easier to do a few fewer restrictions, I should say, in perhaps the downtown area. I'm also thinking in terms of our discussions on a overview basis of revitalizing the downtown. So continuing to look at slightly denser housing. Obviously, there wouldn't be a huge increase in the housing downtown, but it would be, somewhat denser too, and that would in turn help support downtown businesses with walking customers. And with the completion of the development behind the two mansions on Main Street, that will of course increase a little bit, but it will also give us parking for drivers down to come downtown and help shop at those businesses downtown. And with the downtown corridor project, this is all, it's all tying in together. I think that we could do a discussion of the residential property in the same area. And that it's going to be piecemeal. It's just going to be whenever a property is considered for conversion from a single family home into a rental property. and, making sure that we have the proper parameters around it, but also making it more attractive to happen in a nice way for the downtown area.
Almost immediately after I asked, I remembered some discussion and making comments about my neighborhood and what I've seen when properties have become rental versus homeowner living in them. But still, that was all very helpful. Thank you, Mayor.
Sure. Personal opinion, I think Airbnbs, short-term rentals might be, it'll be an interesting discussion, but it's probably lower hanging fruit than tree protection. So I would definitely see hitting that first.
I agree.
Agreed.
I do think that there is plenty of voice in town to revisit tree protection. And I think we heard it. I certainly think I heard it at town meeting regarding the citizens petition that was soundly defeated. But the comments over and over and over again were, I think this is a shame. I think this is terrible. We're losing these trees. I don't like the way this all went down, but our hands are kind of tied. And those comments came from both ends of what I see as the Hopkinton political spectrum. So I do think that there is a place to take that up again. And I'm with you on the low hanging fruit, but I would love for us to have a goal to have another proposal to the planning board for them to consider for town meeting 2023.
Through the chair, if I may ask
Yes.
a question.
Yes.
Do we have any current bylaws about tree protection, or like if someone clears trees, do they have to replant a certain number?
It is not specific to anyone cutting trees needing to replant. There's certain things within certain subdivisions and some other bylaws, so certain types of development that the planning board can have some remediation.
Okay.
But we actually had a drafted tree protection bylaw. It got as far as draft and discussion with the planning board. And it wasn't terrible. It was, I think it needs some tweaks, I think it didn't need necessarily an entire rewrite because there were some good parts. But there was good consideration not to take it forward at that particular time too. So the only other tree protection is on scenic roads and only within the right of way because they're protected under the scenic road bylaw. And the planning board has to bless any removal of trees or pruning of trees.
Okay.
And the OSLPD bylaw, the last we had left that one was around the time that Chuck Joseph had come to speak to us and representing other developers as well. And just saying that it is a good bylaw the way it is, and that he was concerned about, he or they, I should say, were concerned about us tweaking it and it causing more problems than any benefits that we might have aimed for. So unintended consequences. And it originally did come up as just a way to make it better, not because there is anything wrong with it per se, but just to make it perhaps clearer for planning board. But I think that, it went onto the back burner by good reason once we had heard those comments at that time. So I'm fine with it kind of being lower on the list and tackling Airbnb and tree protection. And then the discussion about housing and how to continue to work on attainable housing in town.
Through the chair, I concur with all of that. I would say, though, that the OSLPD, I don't necessarily, I appreciated Chuck Joseph's visit. I don't necessarily think that Chuck Joseph has the last word. So I do think it's worth keeping in mind, but I like it near the bottom of our list of 5 items there for now.
Through the chair, just a counter perspective to that. One of the other things that we've discussed internally with the OSLPD is Massachusetts has an open space residential development. I don't want to say it's a program. It's not really a guideline. They just have this, a lot of encouragement through grant money and technical assistance on open space residential developments. And Mass Audubon put together a spreadsheet that allowed communities to evaluate their OSRD based off of what a good OSRD should look like. And so I've gone through that with the Blackstone Valley Collaborative representative. And one of the things that we could do for OSLPD is change it, not necessarily to benefit developers, but to get it closer to what a good OSRD looks like in Massachusetts. And it's more specific with regard to the open space preservation. Instead of allowing for just 50% of the parcel being donated as open space, it's really focusing on the beneficial natural resources on site and allowing for more flexibility on the developable portions on site in balance with preservation of those types of things. We tend to discourage wetlands being located in the open space portion of open space developments. This would change that and say wetlands are important. So put all of your wetlands in the open space portion, and then you can have more flexibility with the developable upland portions. Just because the focus is more preservation of natural resources rather than what we tend to focus on in Hopkinton is usability of that open space for recreational and passive recreational uses. So that's just a counterpoint to the OSLPD bylaw. Not saying we need to move it up in the hierarchy, but there's also a perspective of not necessarily looking on the developer's behalf, but on open space preservation behalf.
I imagine if we considered something like that, my time on the Conservation Commission might have fewer meetings dedicated to developers asking to move within buffer zones and infringe on the wetlands more often, if we gave the kind of flexibility you were just talking about, John.
Potentially.
Okay, so basically we've reached a consensus that Airbnbs and short-term rentals being low-hanging fruit probably should be taken first and moved out of the way, and then tree protection, and then the other items. Looks like it.
Yeah, I agree as well. I know through the chat, I know Airbnb has been brought up at least 3 years ago. It was brought up first, and we don't have any regulation in that area. So maybe getting started on that one, we may find things that we need to figure out and stuff. So even though it seems like a low-hanging fruit, I was also worried of how big is it going to end up, and we have to tackle it someday or the other. So we should take it up.
Okay. With that, should we move on to reviewing and passing the minutes of Feb 14th? Has everyone read it? Any changes?
No comments from me.
I'm good.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to pass the minutes of Feb 14th?
Sundar, I'll make that motion.
Second, Mary Larson Marlowe.
Thank you. Let's put it to a vote. Ted Barker Hook. Sorry. Ted Barker Hook.
That's fine. Aye.
James Burton.
Aye.
Mary Larson Marlowe.
Aye.
Elise Barrett Mihaloski.
Aye.
Mbta Chandrasekhar.
Aye.
Rachel Rossin.
Aye.
Ron Foisey.
Aye.
And Sundar Subramanian is an aye. Did I miss anyone?
Sundar.
Yes.
How do you get Elise's last name like that. Madhu's last name like that.
Sorry.
And you trip on Hook.
Where I come from, Sivaraman and Chandrasekhar and Subramaniam, let's roll off your tongue.
Oh,
With the chair, I think
yes.
this might also be Sundar's last meeting with
Yes, yes,
Oh,
Oh,
yes, yes. I think quite a few people probably know that. Madhu and few others may not. So yeah, I have decided to step down from both the ZAC as well as the planning board. Late summer, we're actually moving out of town, out of state, actually. So yes.
we'll
so
miss
that-
you. We'll miss you definitely in Zach
Thank
and in
you.
town, and you and Meena. Of course, it's like we'll definitely miss you guys.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Kind words. Yeah,
Yes,
Sundar, I
very
knew you were
nice.
leaving. Where are you going though?
we are actually moving to Northern California.
Oh, nice.
Oh,
Oh,
nice.
wow.
Yeah, our,
Does
our
that
oldest
mean
son
San
is
Francisco?
settled there.
Does that
and
mean
my
the
wife
Bay Area?
decided- Yeah, say that again.
I said, does that mean the Bay Area?
So my son lives in San Francisco. We have no reason to be in San Francisco. So within a 90-minute commute of San Francisco is fine. San Jose, or maybe all the way up to Sacramento should be fine. It has to be affordable
Yeah.
so- or attainable at the very least. So
Attainable.
I hear they're
Nothing's
putting in
attainable
some new
up in-
garden apartments.
I'll take that.
In 90
Good
minutes, that's
downsizing.
about what, 5 miles, right? In traffic.
Yeah, some of you may also know this. I think Dave Paul is leaving the planning board, and I believe he's moving to Boston. So there are a couple of moves. Yeah,
Oh, I hadn't heard about Dave, huh?
yeah.
Yeah, we just heard.
Oh, really? So it's very new news?
It's very new. Yeah. Well,
But
we'll
Oh,
miss
it was
you,
a pleasure
Sundar.
serving. Yeah, thank you.
You can zoom into our meetings anytime you want.
Absolutely, absolutely, I will.
Shameless plug, we have now advertised Sundar's planning board seat. So if anyone wants to be on the planning board, you can submit a letter and your resume. And then if you miss this chance, when Dave Paul officially resigns, we'll be posting his seat as well.
Oh, so that'll be a few months from now.
Or yeah, maybe less than a few months.
Yeah, exactly.
And with that, can I entertain a motion to adjourn today's meeting?
So
So
moved.
moved. Second,
And on that note, let's put it to a roll call vote. Ed Parker Hook,
Aye.
James Burton,
Aye.
Elise Barrett Mihalowski,
Hi.
Madhumita Chandrasekhar,
Hi.
Rachel Rawson,
Aye.
Mary Larson Marlowe,
aye.
Ron Foisey,
Aye.
and Sundar Sivaraman is an aye. Thank you so much, and good night, and have a great rest of the day, rest of the night, and
Rest of
the
our
term.
lives.
Oh.
Oh,
Good luck, Sundar.
bye,
Thank you.
Sundar.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Aye.
Goodbye, Sundar. I'll look for you at the courts. Oh, he's gone.